Good morning. I'm Ms. Collier, and on today's episode of the Tortilla Cat Files, we're going to talk about Pocahontas. Now, we all know the Disney movie Pocahontas. She was a grown woman and she helped save Captain John Smith from being killed by her father when he was captured and was going to have his head smashed with a rock, and she saved him, and everybody lived happily ever after. We all know that story from Disney. That movie came out in 1995, and interestingly, that's the first movie I took my daughter to see in the theater. She was about 3 at that time. But is that really the true story of Pocahontas? Let's look at the facts that we do know. We know that Pocahontas was born in about 1596. We say about 1596 because the Native Americans didn't keep really good records back then. In fact, most of them didn't have a written language. And so we can guess about 1596. Her name was not Pocahontas. Her name was Matoaka. And I'm sorry if you speak Algonquin for how badly I'm probably butchering that, but I couldn't find it written phonetically. And so this is the best I can do with it. Pocahontas was her nickname. And depending on who you read, it either meant playful one or ill behaved child, which I think basically translates into brat, but I'm not sure. So she was also the daughter of Chief Powhatan, who was the ruler of this group of Algonquin Indians that had about 30 different communities in it. So he was a very powerful man. As the daughter of a chief, she would have had maybe a slightly privileged upbringing, but she would also have had to learn to do what was typically the women's jobs in the tribe, which were farming, cooking, collecting herbs, building a house, making clothes, butchering meat, and tanning hides. When we talk about tanning hides, we're not talking about setting them out in the sun so they get darker. We're talking about how they had to go scrape all of the hair off of the hides. Then they would treat them with animal products and rub them and make sure that they stayed soft and supple so that you could bend them and use them for clothing. You could use them to make houses. You know, whatever you needed to do with these, you could do. Because if you just take the hide off of the animal and leave it, it's going to dry all stiff and hard, and you're not going to be able to do anything with it. So this was a very important thing. Okay, and in December of 1606, 104 settlers sailed from England to settle in Virginia and found the Jamestown Colony. All of this is happening in what's called the Tidewater region of Virginia. One of those soldiers, or one of those people actually, was John Smith, who had been a soldier. Sorry, that wasn't an earthquake, it was Scout. And he had apparently been a fairly effective, successful soldier. And he was now going to be part of this company going to the New World that was sent by the Virginia Company. Somewhere along the time during the 4 months that they were sailing from England to Virginia, John Smith got in some trouble with the people on board the boat, and he was actually arrested for mutiny. And mutiny means that someone was planning to take over the boat. I can't find any real details of this anywhere without a lot more research. And all I can find is that he was arrested for disagreeing with somebody on this boat, and he was actually imprisoned. And when they arrived in the New World, he was in shackles. If you don't know what that means, shackles is like the handcuffs for your legs. They go around your ankles. I'm sure you've seen them in movies and on television. I mean, people are still shackled today when they go into court. If they're an exceptionally dangerous person, they'll have on handcuffs, they'll have on the thing around their waist, and then they'll have the shackles on their legs. We still do this today. But when they reached Virginia, they had a box that the Virginia Company had sent, and they opened it up, and there was inside of it was the copy of the charter which the king had given them, which was their permission to start this colony, and all of the rules that were supposed to be enforced in the colony. And there was a list of the people that were supposed to be in charge. And one of the people that was supposed to be in charge and be on the council for the colony was John Smith. So they had to let him go and let him become a council member, which they did. And the colony was struggling for food and supplies. When they arrived in the New World, most of these people were not farmers. And when they got there, it wasn't already set up to farm. I mean, farming is hard work no matter what. But when you get to a brand new place that nobody's ever farmed before, and this was still, forest, think about what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to take all of those trees out. You're going to have to take all of the stumps out. If there's rocks, you have to dig all of those out. You have to get the soil prepared. Then you have to plow it. And they didn't have tractors. So this is going to be hard work. They had those plows that was one single blade pulled by a horse and held by a guy and pushed behind a horse. And I'm not sure they had a whole lot of horses at this point. They couldn't find that written anywhere either. So this was going to be back-breaking months worth of work, and it's April. And that may seem early in the year, but it's going to take months to get these fields ready. And then you have to plant the crops, which take months to grow so that they get big enough for you to harvest. And depending on when winter hits in Virginia, you're probably not going to have time to get a full crop grown and harvested before the winter comes, which means you're only going to have the food that you were able to bring with you on the ship, which you've probably been eating all of this time because you didn't have any other food unless you could shoot game, deer or rabbits or whatever, and find things that were safe to eat in the forest, because as we know, not everything in the forest is safe to eat. Some of it's poisonous. All you've got is what came on that ship to get all the way through the winter and until basically the next year when you can plant crops, grow them, harvest them, and now you have them. This is why part of the reason why so many people dies in these first years of these colonies. So John Smith decided to go and talk to the indigenous peoples in the area and see if he could get some food, some supplies, some help to help this colony, because this colony was struggling pretty badly. He was found and taken prisoner by some of the Native Americans, some of the Powhatan people, and he was taken to the chief. John Smith kept a diary, and he talked about this incident, and he talked about meeting Pocahontas, and he was apparently held captive. Scout, you okay up there? He was apparently held captive for a little while. It doesn't say exactly how long. And he did write in his diary that he met Pocahontas, who was the daughter of the chieftain, and there was some indication that they had talked with each other and that he had tried to teach her a little bit of English and she had tried to teach him a little bit of Algonquin. There's some indication that they did interact during this time. He was released and went back to his village. And they did have some relations where there were some trading going on between the Native Americans and the colonists. It wasn't ever a great relationship, but it was a semi-friendly relationship. In October of 1609, John Smith was injured in a gunpowder explosion and was pretty badly injured and was forced to return on a ship to England. And Powhatan and Pocahontas were apparently told at that point that he had died. And so they didn't realize he was still alive. Things went on kind of the same way, but relations between the Native Americans and the colonists kept getting worse and worse and worse until in 1613, Pocahontas was actually kidnapped and put on board an English ship. And it was the ship that was, the captain's name was Samuel Argall. And she was held there for ransom until Powhatan would agree to give the colonists food and release some captives that they were holding. Well, he was holding out and he wasn't going to do it. So Pocahontas was on the ship for quite some time. And during that time period, she met a man named John Rolfe. He was a widower, which means he had been married before, but his wife had died. And he was a tobacco planter. So they talked and met for a while, and they fell in love and decided that they were going to get married, which was probably also for political reasons. And Pocahontas converted to Christianity, and at that point took the name Rebecca. So the marriage was approved by Powhatan and by the governor, Sir Thomas Dale, the governor of Jamestown, and the couple was married in April of 1614. In 1615, they had a son, and his name was Thomas Rolfe. We don't know a lot about their life together, but we do know that in 1616, John, Thomas, and Rebecca, who was formerly known as Pocahontas, sailed to England kind of on a tour to raise money for the colony. They arrived in London, and Pocahontas, who is now known as Lady Rebecca Wolfe, was an instant celebrity. She attended plays, she danced at balls, she was even presented to the king and queen. And she was the most popular girl at any place that she went, because, she was so different and so unusual. At one of these parties, she actually ran into Captain John Smith, who she thought was dead all this time. So she was very excited to see him again. She was happy to see him. But she also apparently talked to him about how badly he had treated the Native Americans while he was in Virginia. But they do know this is a documented meeting. This meeting really did take place. During this time period, the Virginia Company commissioned a portrait of Pocahontas, a painting of her. That's this painting right here. This is the only portrait of her that was done while she was alive and while she was living. And if you'll notice down here, it's got a bunch of writing. And what that says is Matoaka, alias Rebecca, daughter of the most powerful prince of the Powhatan Empire of Virginia. This portrait is actually still available to be seen in the National Portrait Gallery in London, England. So if you ever go to England, you can go and check this portrait out in real life. And it's the only image that we know that was drawn of her while she was alive. So this is the closest we're going to ever get to knowing what she actually looks like. In March of 1617, Pocahontas, her husband, and her son all got on a ship and set sail to go back to Virginia. But they didn't make very much progress, and she became gravely ill and had to be taken ashore at Gravesend, England. She died and was buried on March the 21st in 1617 in Gravesend Church, which is called St. George's Church in Gravesend. We don't exactly know what killed her. We know that she died of a disease, but the way that it's written, it could be anything from smallpox to pneumonia. And it's highly likely she caught some disease while she was in England, because this would have been a whole new disease pool for her. Her body wouldn't have known these pathogens, these bacteria, so she wouldn't have had any defenses for them. It's just like what happened with the world when the COVID-19 virus broke out. Nobody had been exposed to this before. Nobody had any defenses against it. Nobody had any antibodies that would help fight it off. So everybody was susceptible to it. That's what tended to happen with the Native American people a lot of the time when they interacted with the English people, because they had different diseases. And if they hadn't brought them with them when they came to the New World, the Native Americans were very susceptible to catching them. There's also rumors that she was poisoned, but we don't know who would have done that or why, and that's not provable at this point. So we do know that she died, and we know that she's buried at St. George's Church in Gravesend, England. Her husband, John Rolfe, went ahead and returned to Virginia, but her son Thomas, who was still very young, remained with relatives in England to be raised there. About 20 years later, he returned to Virginia and claimed his inheritance from his father and grandfather and became a successful gentleman tobacco farmer. Now, is the legend of Pocahontas saving John Smith a true story? Okay, here's what we know about that. We know that John Smith kept a diary during the time that he was captured by the Native Americans, but he never wrote the story down about being captured and his head put on the rock and they were going to smash his head, and Pocahontas covered up his head and wouldn't let her father kill him. Never wrote that story down. Never told that story to anybody until after he had met Pocahontas again in England and after she had died. Never heard this story before until after she was dead, and couldn't say, man, that's not what happened. So we don't know. We don't know for sure what happened. We do know, like I said, he kept a diary and he didn't write this down. He didn't tell the story to anybody because nobody else wrote it down. There's other people that kept diaries from that colony that have survived, and none of them have this story in it. And this would have probably been a pretty big story, not in them. We also know that around the time period that this story appeared, there was a very popular Scottish song that had pretty much this same plot to it. A guy was captured by a clan, a different clan. They had what they called clans in Scotland, which are kind of like tribes. And a guy was captured by a different clan. They were going to kill him, and the daughter of the chieftain saved him from being killed. And it was a very popular song, and it kind of pretty much matches John Smith's story about Pocahontas. So did this story, this legend actually happen? I don't know. We know Pocahontas lived. We know she had a son with a British man that she had married. We know that she went to England. We know that she died there. By the way, she was only 21 when she died. We know all of that actually happened. We don't know about this legend of Pocahontas. What do you think? Do you think this happened, or do you think this is something John Smith made up to, increase his own celebrity? What happened here? What do you think? Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Tell me if you liked the episode. Tell me if you want me to talk to you about something else in the future. Let me know what you think. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Tortilla Cat Files, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.